Concern over rape is mounting in this community.
We believe he watched as the two of them had sexual intercourse.
The homicides were acts of rage.
He, crushed her face. He's a monster.
He could be somebody's neighbor. He could be somebody's boyfriend.
He has never been caught. And I will never be able to get it out of my mind until there is closure.
In the 1980s, Richard Ramirez, a psychopath known as the Night Stalker, terrorized Los Angeles with a string of vicious murders. Ramirez was sentenced to death in 1989, but a decade earlier, another man, known as the original Night Stalker, baffled and eluded California authorities. To this day, this killer has not been caught. The summer of 1976 marked the beginning of a 3-year reign of terror by a man known as the East Area Rapist. Starting in small bedroom communities in Sacramento, California, and reaching south to Stockton, this vicious predator is estimated to have raped more than 50 women, making him one of the most prolific serial sex offenders in history.
The amount of fear he put in everybody, I mean, the fear in the victims, the fear in the community. This guy was scary.
I got a call one morning, respond to a rape. A week or 2 weeks later, responded to another rape. We backtracked, found out there had been, I think, 4 other rapes before these. Nobody had bothered to connect them.
Somebody put together a chart of a whole bunch of unsolved rapes. But as we went through the charts, we were able to eliminate all but I think it was 5 or 6 that we decided were definitely all the same.
It soon became clear to authorities what they were up against. A clever and ruthless criminal.
The East Area Rapist had an extremely identifiable method of operation, his MO, unlike any other rape cases that we had ever been involved in.
The rapist attacked victims inside their homes while they were sleeping.
He wanted the definite surprise. He wanted to catch them while they were really relaxed.
He would come into the house. He quietly would go back into the bedroom where the victim was.
He wakes the victims by shining a light on them and telling them to wake up.
They could see nothing except there was a threat of the gun that they would be killed if they did not do what he asked them to do. It's pitch black and you just have this bright light in your face and this voice screaming at you. I mean, you're going to cooperate.
Once the victim complied, the rapist blindfolded and tied them up.
Most of the time, he would bring shoelaces with him. Other times, he would take them from the shoes that were in the closet there.
He would tie them really tight, hands and feet, and they're in health circulation. You don't tie them that tight on somebody unless you're really trying to hurt them.
One knot in particular became the rapist's signature.
They call it a diamond knot, and none of us knew how to tie it.
Then he would just basically torture him.
The initial attack was awful in its own right, but the rumors of the torture and what might be coming next, laying there not knowing if he was coming back, getting up not knowing if he was going to jump out at you again.
He would spend hours, in a house, just terrifying the subject that was inside.
Even though rape is bad, that's not what they were reporting. They were reporting what they went through, the fear that they went through.
To avoid alarming the public, local law enforcement decided not to immediately release any information to the press.
We weren't quite ready to let the public know that we had a series going out there because they had nothing to give the people out there.
Police worked with victims to piece together a physical description of the attacker.
We know he was Caucasian, and we know that because they did see his bare legs. And at the time, they thought, when he first started hitting in '76, that he was between 19 and 28, 29 years old.
Mostly they talked about medium height, medium build, athletic build.
I was blindfolded and told not to look at him. He was bigger than me, but he wasn't not a giant, bulky man.
And the attacker made sure to hide his face.
He always wore a ski mask or some type of mask.
On November 4th, 1976, the East Area Rapist claimed his 7th and 8th victims, both on the same day. Police finally decided to alert the media, and fear gripped the area.
We have concluded that we probably are dealing with the East Side Rapist.
The press came out with that it was serial rapist, and everybody started getting involved.
Concern over rape is mounting in this community. Many of the same women at this workshop will gather again next month for a sheriff's talk on safety in the neighborhood.
The community was all up in arms. There were rumors out there that he was cutting off fingers, that he was cutting off ears, that he was cutting off the nipples from the women's breast, and none of that was true. We decided that we needed to have some community meetings to be able to answer people's questions and to be able to set the record straight.
I live alone and I would like to learn how to protect myself.
People had to change the way they were living. You know, they had to lock themselves into their home.
People just did not go out at night, and some people just didn't sleep at night. They slept in shifts. You know, there was a lot of fear, and even in my own home, we put everything we could on the windows and door locks.
Don't like it. It's getting too close to home.
Do you plan on taking any precautions?
I put locks on my doors, peepholes in just last week.
All the hardware stores sold out on security hardware. Gun sales jumped 20-25%.
I have a gun, but I still don't feel safe being, at home alone.
This is an entirely paranoid county. Anybody that did a burglary had to be out of their mind. Had to be stupid. Good chance of getting blown away.
For a full year, authorities tracked countless leads and sifted through hundreds of clues, but were unable to develop a suspect. Meanwhile, in Sacramento suburbs like Carmichael and Citrus Heights, the victim count grew.
When you start hitting 15, 20, and he's not been caught, I think everybody wanted justice.
By the spring of 1977, a serial sex offender known as the East Area Rapist had brutally assaulted more than 20 women in Northern California.
Now the whole community will be victimized because he's running wild.
The panic level was just extreme. He was like a phantom out there. Everybody was starting to be very fearful in Sacramento.
A special task force was created in an all-out effort to catch the predator.
I forget how many officers we had at the time, about 1,200.
Sheriff's Department was spending more money than they ever spent on any other project in their history.
Because if there is an intruder...
Authorities focused on the fact that the attacks occurred within a contained area.
Rancho Cordova is very middle class. On the north side of Rancho Cordova, there was the American River, and it's got a lot of trees and bushes and hiding places.
We felt all along that he really lived in the Rancho Cordova area.
It's a neighborhood that he's comfortable with. He likes to have things like creek beds and river beds. It seems to be his umbilical cord through the area.
This is Cordova Park behind Cordova High School, and we spent a lot of evenings down in here.
We set up sonic warning systems so that anybody walking through the area would set off an alarm.
Our stakeout units had night vision glasses so they could see anybody that was moving around. There was just nothing spared in trying to identify and apprehend this individual.
Even with state-of-the-art equipment and hundreds of officers scouring the area, authorities came up empty-handed, and the public was losing patience.
There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of, I don't want to say it was righteous anger towards the Sheriff's Department and the investigators, because we were doing everything possible, working with every angle that we could.
There's a lot of panic around this area. That's what I've heard. because they figured this guy should have been caught already.
Reports on the rapist's habit of entering homes days before he attacked fueled the paranoia.
He would break into the house when the people weren't there and set them up prior to hitting.
We would find window screens that had been removed.
He knew the house, he knew the layout.
And then would leave and wait for the victims to come home. He had broken into one of the extra bedrooms and unloaded our .357. So if we had been able to reach for the gun, it would have been unloaded.
And, like many serial offenders, the East Area Rapist seemed to follow media coverage of his actions.
Once the series really got going, he seemed to play off on what law enforcement was doing. Every time we said he wasn't doing this, his next rape, he would do it.
I think he was a little brazen. I think he just figured we were all pretty stupid. He could do what he wanted.
For instance, the first rapes, the victims were alone, and we made mention of that in the paper. The next rape, the husband was in the house.
In the spring of 1977, the rapist attacked 6 couples.
The first thing I heard was a crack, and then somebody yelling, and then a bright light. And so he had come in through the slider and hit my husband in the ankle, and then just started screaming obscenities at us.
He would tell them, I'm only here for food, I'm only here for money, I'm not going to hurt anybody, until he got them tied up.
The suspect has the female tie the male's ankles together, and then he has her lay down on the bed. He ties her hands behind her back using the bindings that he's brought with him, and then ties her ankles together. He then goes to the male victim, reties the bindings that the female has tied on both the wrists and the ankles.
Why didn't a man fight back? Probably because he had a gun on his head, and the East Area Rapist threatened to kill his wife.
He'd put a cup and saucer on husband's back and tell him if he moved, he'd hear the rattle of the dishes, and he'd kill her.
You don't get prepared for that type of thing.
We had a plan, if it ever happened, that I would only tie one hand, and, you know, he would get loose and, you know, catch the guy. Well, when it came down to it, you're scared to death, and you do what you're told.
The rape itself was only part of the horrific crime.
Many times he would complete the sexual assault, and they could hear him walking around the house.
1 or 2 cases, he ate food out of the refrigerator.
And there were a lot of what I would call souvenirs of the victims that were removed from the home. Driver's license, photo ID, and jewelry. There was nothing you could do. You were completely vulnerable.
Because the rapist always wore gloves, police were unable to collect fingerprints from the crime scenes. But a possible break came when authorities examined traces of the suspect's semen. The samples did not reveal a blood type, meaning the offender was what is known as a non-secretor, a status held by just 1/5 of the male population.
80% of the population are secretors, 20% are non, so now we know it's only 20% of the population we have to look at.
Eventually, one victim caught a glimpse of the rapist and provided details for a composite sketch. In May 1977, Sacramento residents finally got a look at the man who had been terrorizing them for nearly a year. The release of the drawing seemed to spook whoever was committing the attacks. That summer, not a single rape was attributed to the suspect.
He just disappeared, and that's all we knew.
By the end of 1977, the East Area Rapist had claimed 28 victims in Sacramento, California. The attacker also stole driver's licenses from several of the victims' houses, leading authorities to believe he might try to contact some of the women.
We decided to put phone traps on some of the victims' phones to see if he would call and if we could trace the phone call.
Eventually, he started calling these people back.
that same growl, and that same voice, and that same threats. It just had to be really just very scary to a victim. I mean, they don't know if this guy's coming back.
Police were unable to trace any of the phone calls because the criminal didn't stay on the line long enough. Meanwhile, the masked rapist grew even more brazen. He widened his range and started targeting other areas of the city.
We knew that he was hitting on both sides of the American River, and this whole area is riddled with 26-mile bike trails. We made the assumption that he was moving up and down those bike trails.
He would steal a bicycle, and he would leave on that bicycle, and it would be found a couple of blocks away from where he raped.
If he did have a car, it was probably maybe a mile or two or further away. And then he would eventually get into that and leave.
As long as he was within 5 minutes of a thoroughfare, that would be all that he would need. And once he was on that road, he was gone.
In a tragic irony, widespread fear in the community also helped protect the rapist. One woman spotted the attacker, but was too afraid to make a report.
One of the Rancho Cordova cases, lady looked out her curtains and saw a man in a ski mask going around the side of the house across the street. Closed her curtains because she knew that the East Area Rapist was in the community, did not call us.
Why isn't it, reported? I don't know. People don't want to get involved. That person ended up being a victim.
On the night of February 2nd, 1978, newlyweds Brian and Katie Maggiore were walking their dog in Rancho Cordova when police believed they noticed a man acting suspiciously.
Brian may have confronted this individual and possibly told him to leave them alone or get out of the area.
Brian was in the military and military police. Brian being Brian, you feel like you can protect whoever you have to protect. You can take care of yourself and take care of her.
Somewhere in this area, the suspect draws a gun and points it at Brian, at which point he and Katie turn and start running along La Gloria Way. Fearing for their safety and we believe trying to hide, they ended up running into the backyard of this residence.
I was in my upstairs bedroom there, and I heard a lot of yelling and commotion.
Brian and Katie continued around the side of the pool and ran into the adjoining neighbor's backyard.
I looked out my window and I seen the guy go up and just shoot him point blank right in the chest, and continued around the other side of the house chasing the gal.
Katie continues running over to the east side of the residence toward a gate that's on the side of the house. The suspect caught up to her and shot her as well.
He came running right down the sidewalk and came right up on the lawn next to the tree, and right as he came to the tree, he looked up and he saw me standing right here, and he just turned around as quick as he could and just headed straight down there towards the fire hydrant around the corner.
The killer escaped, but a key piece of evidence left behind pointed to the East Area Rapist.
There's a particular knot that was used in many of the East Area Rapist cases that were consistent with the pre-tied shoelaces that were found at this scene.
It is the East Area Rapist that did it. I have no doubt that that's who's responsible for their murders.
On April 16th, 1978, a more detailed sketch of the suspect was released. After 31 rapes and a double homicide, things quieted down in Sacramento.
Obviously, this guy doesn't want to get caught. Now we have something that may be very consistent with his looks, so he flees.
But that summer, he struck again outside of Sacramento. 5 rapes with similar profiles occurred in Stockton, Modesto, and Davis. Detectives from those areas spread the word to other nearby communities.
They told us all about him and how violent he was and what type of rapes were going on, and said that we needed to be ready for him.
Less than 3 months later, the nightmare continued. Starting in the fall of 1978, a dozen women were assaulted in Contra Costa County, just 40 miles east of San Francisco.
This is a typical neighborhood of where he would hit, middle class and very clean, and that's what he went for. But you can see this type of area here where he can sit, he can watch as long as he wants, and nobody's going to see what he's doing.
Then in July 1979, the attacks suddenly stopped.
I was torn. Yes, I was happy that he was no longer raping the people in my community, but I was sad that I didn't catch him. I knew he was still out there.
In the late 1970s, Contra Costa County Detective Larry Crompton worked a task force dedicated to catching the worst sexual predator in California history. But even after more than 50 rapes, police still didn't have a suspect in custody.
We were all frustrated, and we felt bad knowing that we didn't catch him.
The East Area Rapist basically stopped in 1979, and the theory just became that, somebody had killed him.
In my heart, I knew he wasn't dead. I knew he was still raping.
On October 1st, 1979, a couple was fast asleep in the rural town of Goleta, 300 miles south of Contra Costa County.
At about 2 a.m., a victim's residence was broken into through a side door. The door was pried with a screwdriver. The deadbolt was defeated.
The intruder barged into the bedroom and tied up the couple.
When he first came in, he had had a knife up to their throats and telling them that if they were to say anything, he would slit their throats.
He removes the female from the bed and moves her into the living room area of the house. He paces up and down the hallway, and as he's pacing, he begins to say over and over again, "I'll kill them. I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill them."
It was like, he was trying to build himself up, get the courage up.
Now the victims have picked up on the fact that he's not there to rob them. He is there to kill them.
The woman saw a window of opportunity and took charge of the situation.
As the suspect moved up the hall to briefly check on the man who was in the bedroom, she got to her feet, hopped to the front door, hopped out into the front yard, and began to scream.
And that's when FBI agent Stan Lowe's heard this.
I was up late reading, and at about 2:15 I heard a scream. Someone was in trouble, and it was a woman.
Lowe's called for backup and ran outside to see what was happening.
At this point in time, the suspect seems to realize that he's lost control of the female, and so now it's time for him to leave.
Right about here, I saw the guy on the bicycle take off. He came out of the driveway and turned left. I yelled at him, he pedaled harder.
The FBI agent jumped into his car and chased the suspect.
He went about 100 yards and dumped the bike and took off through the backyard. And that's when I decided it would be better to wait for the sheriff's deputies to arrive.
The man got away, but the two victims were safe. Less than 3 months later, on December 30th, just a quarter mile from the first crime, another couple wasn't as lucky.
Dr. Offerman was a well-known physician. Dr. Manning was a psychologist, and she was down that particular evening visiting when the intruder shot and killed him, and she was bludgeoned to death.
It appeared that evidence found at the scene matched the earlier assault.
The murders that occurred on December 30th, 1979 were linked to the attack on my neighbors that occurred on October 1st, 1979, by the rope used to tie them up, the knots used to fasten the rope.
In Northern California, Larry Crompton heard news of the Goleta murders and thought of the East Area Rapist.
I went over the reports, and I looked at it, and I saw the similarities. The bindings were the same, the mask, the gloves, it was all there. It had to be our man.
On December 30th, 1979, in Goleta, California, an intruder entered the home of a doctor and killed him and his girlfriend. The criminal's method of operation was similar to that of the East Area Rapists, who was still at large.
When I heard about the Goleta murders, everything was there. the ties, the binding behind the back, the prowling that happened before, all of that matched. And I knew in my heart it was our man.
2.5 months later, 40 miles south of Santa Barbara, another couple was viciously murdered.
Lyman and Charlene Smith were a fast-lane couple. She was beautiful, she was ambitious, and he was a prominent attorney, and he wanted to be a judge. They lived in a very nice neighborhood up on the hills of Ventura with a distant ocean view. They had disappeared off the map for a few days, and so finally Gary, Lyman's son by his first marriage, showed up to mow the lawn.
He went inside and saw what appeared to be two bodies under the covers, the log on the floor and debris on the floor.
When police got to the Smith residence, they were shocked by the brutality of the crime. The couple was tied up, Charlene was raped, and both were bludgeoned almost beyond recognition.
There's what you call an overkill where there's rage. And to me, the homicides were acts of rage.
He chooses to beat them in the head and to punish them and to make them suffer and have a painful death. He's angry with these victims.
To find a motive for the murders, authorities focused on Lyman and Charlene's social circle.
It just never seemed to anybody that this could be a random crime.
But as potential suspects were eliminated, it seemed clear that the killer did not know the Smiths.
Charlene had an office down near the beach, and there are a lot of tourists, a lot of people in that area, and so it's possible that this person was passing through town.
He must have followed her home and then scouted the area, identified her husband, the cars, a place to park, a time to hit.
There were some neighbors who reported prowlers or reported hearing noises within a week or two prior to the homicide.
The knot used to tie up the Smiths also indicated the crime was the work of a methodical killer.
It was a more ornate knot.
We know that in the murders down south, he used the diamond knot. Problem is, the investigators down south didn't know about the rapist. They didn't know about that knot being used. Therefore, they didn't have that connection.
While Ventura law enforcement struggled with the case, another young couple was murdered in Dana Point, California, 120 miles to the south.
In the Harrington case, you have a 24-year-old man who's in his 4th year of medical school, and his wife. They'd been married just 3 short months. And they're living in his father's home in Miguel Shores. We believe the suspect watched as the two of them had sexual intercourse, and shortly after that, he entered their home, raped her, and then murdered both of them. They're discovered by Keith's father approximately 2 days after the murder.
They were super kids. Our message to those people listening is that it can happen to you, and it apparently can happen without reason or motive.
The Harrington murders were almost identical to the Smiths. Both couples bound, both women raped, and all 4 bludgeoned to death.
I think in the Smith case, and also in the Harrington case, I felt that he had reached this perfection of what he had wanted the crime to be. These were his 2 perfect crimes.
6 months later, on February 6, 1981, 28-year-old Manuela Whitcune was murdered in Irvine.
The offender forced entry to her home and came in and sexually assaulted her, bound her hands behind her back and her ankles together, and then bludgeoned her to death.
There was a serial killer on the loose in Southern California, and with the East Area rapist still at large, authorities speculated whether this could be the same maniac they'd been hunting for more than 5 years.
Back in the 80s, communication was different than what it is today. We didn't have the internet, so it was word of mouth.
Unfortunately, the law enforcement system, each county knows what's going on within a county, and maybe a neighboring county, but a lot of times not even the neighboring county.
He was one step ahead of us, and a lot of times it was because of the lack of communication.
From December of 1979 to February of 1981, 7 people were brutally murdered along the California coast, from Santa Barbara to Irvine. The killer's method was similar to the East Area Rapists, who was still on the loose.
I was still working the East Area Rapist Task Force when the serial killer started hitting in Southern California, and it was very frustrating. The departments didn't want their communities to know who was in their area. They didn't want to frighten them that way.
Then, on July 27, 1981, the murderer struck again in Santa Barbara, killing his 8th and 9th victims, Greg Sanchez and his girlfriend, Sherry Domingo.
Domingo was about 35 years old. She was house sitting for a family member, and they were in the process of trying to sell that particular home.
Sherry's 15-year-old daughter, Debbie, was staying with friends.
I was going through what I now look at as kind of typical teenage rebellion. She and I were arguing a lot over little things. So I had decided that I didn't need to live under her roof.
Debbie clearly remembers the last time she spoke to her mother.
I had called her from a payphone with some ridiculous demand about why I needed to come get something out of her house. And she had said, no, I couldn't do that. I remember getting very angry and screaming out, why don't you just get out of my life? And I hung up that phone.
2 weeks later, Debbie got a phone call from a friend of her mom's.
I thought that it was kind of a ploy to get me to come home and maybe negotiate and work things out. And I said, no, there's nothing you can say that's going to make me come home. So I'm done. And she got real quiet and real serious and very directly. She said, Debbie, I think your mother's dead. When we arrived at the house, and I could see the yellow police tape everywhere and police officers and news camera crews, when I got out of the car, I started to walk toward the house, and people from the police department kind of intercepted me, and they said that it was messy and that they didn't want me inside.
Police believed the killer might have pretended to be a prospective buyer to survey the home.
One of the realtors remembered that somebody had come in, a gentleman, and he was busy with some other clients, so this person proceeded to go in and scope the interior of the house out.
The attacker removed a screen, which allowed him access later that night.
He entered into the bathroom, then went into the bedroom, and that's when he found both sleeping on the bed. She was tied up, lying face down on the bed, and he was laying halfway in the closet.
I tortured myself with the idea that if I had been home when she was attacked, that I could have done something to save her life. And realistically now, looking back, I know that's not true. That if I had been in the house, that I probably wouldn't be here today.
Only circumstantial evidence linked the murders of Sherry and Greg to the earlier local attacks.
The physical description, the shoe size, the ligatures, casing out the place ahead of time, when you throw that all in, it's definitely the same person.
5 years passed without another homicide.
Our initial thought was that he had likely been incarcerated during that time period. We've conducted studies where we've looked at people that were in prison for that time period, released from prison, and at this point that hasn't been fruitful.
There's also the possibility that he was a member of the military, was sent away for an assignment, and then sent back for release 5 years later.
Not a day went by when I didn't think about the East Area Rapist. And I'd say, where is he now? People thought that he might be dead. I didn't trust that he was dead.
On May 4th, 1986, in Irvine, California, 18-year-old Janelle Cruz became the killer's 10th and final victim.
I was in Mexico on a vacation, and they called me. These are one of the calls that a mother gets in the middle of the night to tell me that, yes, the death of my daughter had just happened.
This is where Janelle Cruz lived at the time of her death.
She had been sexually assaulted. There is blunt force trauma to her face, her head in general.
He got her in the back of the head when she was walking away from him before he, crushed her face. He's a monster.
In some of the female victims, he went way overboard and bludgeoning them. He's getting some kind of gratification from them.
There hasn't been closure until he's caught. And that probably would be the closure for us and my family. And for other families.
I would wake at 2, 3 in the morning wondering where he was, and I was tortured by the fact that he was not caught. So for all those years, I kept boxes and boxes of evidence, knowing that someday somebody was going to catch him, and this evidence may come in handy.
For more than a decade, 10 murders in Southern California remained unconnected and unsolved. But in the late 90s, a federal database was put in place to cross-reference criminal DNA profiles, shedding new light on the killings.
When we put the DNA from the crime scene from the Harrington case and the Whithuan case and the Janelle Cruz case into the system, we started getting a match. At the same time, the people in Ventura had put their case into the system.
Authorities were finally able to attribute 10 Southern California murders to one man. They dubbed him the original Night Stalker. Meanwhile, in Northern California, investigator Paul Holes generated a DNA profile for the East Area Rapist. Holes called retired investigator Larry Crompton, who had been trying to link the rapist to the murders in Southern California.
That's when I told him, if you can get a hold of the criminalist down there, I know it's our person.
Holes immediately called the Orange County Sheriff's Department and urged them to compare DNA from the original Night Stalker murders to the Contra Costa rapes.
Consultation was occurring between the criminalist in Contra Costa County and our criminalist here in Orange County.
In 2000, nearly 25 years after the first attack in Sacramento, California, police finally linked the more than 50 Northern California rapes to the 10 murders committed in Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange counties. According to the DNA, the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person. Still, DNA evidence is not 100% reliable.
There is a lot of debate in the scientific community. Is it an identification? Is it unique to that person, or can other people share the same profile? With the millions of profiles that have been uploaded into the databases nationwide as well as internationally, we have yet to see 2 individuals have the same profile across all the DNA that we look at. The biggest thing would be the human error. Is there a sample switch, or is there contamination somewhere?
In 2001, a man who believes the East Area Rapist targeted his sister in 1977 created a website to share information.
The earliest theories were that the ear had some type of connection to law enforcement.
He definitely showed tactics that are commonly taught to police officers in the police academy. Military individuals also are taught those tactics.
I know in California there are a lot of military installations and bases across the entire state. One of the applications of the diamond knot was it had a nautical application. So was there some sort of Navy connection?
His tendencies tend to indicate he had some sort of tactical training in order to carry out these crimes. Could he have gotten that through other means, through reading on his own? Most certainly. You can't just say he had to be a police officer, or he had to have military experience in order to do this.
The website uncovered fresh details about the case.
We've heard about this belt buckle that left an impression on one of the rape victims, which has supposedly 2 guns facing each other but not crossing.
The site also contained information about the coat worn by the Maggiori's killer.
The suspect seen fleeing the crime scene was described as wearing a dark-colored leather jacket with a large grease stain on the back of it. But on the breast of the jacket, there was a embroidered orange dragon.
Law enforcement also released a new piece of evidence never before revealed to the public. A poem sent to Sacramento authorities in the late 1970s.
There's been an extensive amount of work done to the point of Googling the lines within the poem to see if there's text matching from literature from around the world. So far, there's been no direct link made.
In 2004, the Harrington family spent $1.3 million to help fund a California state law requiring all felons to enter their DNA into a federal databank.
From this investigation, we've gained the ability to forcibly extract blood from prisoners in the state prison system who would otherwise just say no to having their DNA taken from them. So the data bank of profiles that we have is ever growing, and so our opportunity to make a match to the offender grows each day.
I really, just for the sake of the victims, want to unmask this guy.
Chances are that this person would never stop committing these crimes unless he was physically incapable of doing so by being locked up in prison or being dead or being a paraplegic.
However, several serial killers, such as the Green River Killer and BTK, were apprehended long after their last crimes were committed.
We now know that these types of individuals can stop. And that is, I think, what is scary about the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker is he could still be out there. He could be somebody's neighbor. He could be somebody's boyfriend or somebody's husband at this point in his life.
Every once in a while, I just have to wonder, where is he? What's he doing?
Is he alive? It's hard to say, but I think he is, and maybe because I'm wishing he's alive because I want to know about this guy.
One thing that's important to understand is that how an offender acts on the crime scene is going to be translated into their personal life. So we would want to look for people who have a history of bondage, who have a history of domestic violence, of being aggressive with women.
I just believe that somebody out there knows something, and I'm hoping that a piece to the puzzle will come to light.
I don't know if we can put a label on somebody of pure evil or not, but we have to be held accountable for our choices, and he's going to have to be held accountable.
I retired in 1998. I've been working on a book that I called Sudden Terror. It covers from the first rape in Sacramento all the way through the last murder in Southern California. It is the same person. He has never been caught. And I will never be able to get it out of my mind until there is closure.
I continue to look at suspects and eliminating people on an ongoing basis. One day, there won't be an elimination, there will be a match.
If you have any information regarding the original Night Stalker crimes, please contact the Sacramento Sheriff's Department at 916-874-5057.